Unit 5, The Republic of Texas. Chapter 13, Lesson 1, Organizing the New Government. What challenges did the leaders of the Republic of Texas face? Terms to know: amend, to change a constitution or law. Capital, a building where the legislative body of a republic, state, or country meets. Public debt, the amount of money a nation's government owes. Tariff, a tax on imported goods. Expenditure, money spent. Revenue, money that a government collects. Annexation, the incorporating of a country or territory into another country or territory. Here's a map of the Republic of Texas. History of Texas capitals. Prior to moving to Houston, the first capital of the new Republic of Texas was in the town of Columbia, now West Columbia. Sam Houston was sworn in as the first president there in October 1836. In November, though, Congress voted to move the capital to Houston. The original Capitol building is shown here after it sustained heavy damage from a 1900 hurricane. The building was rebuilt in 1976. Texas officially became a state in 1845. When its constitution was adopted, Austin was named as the capital until 1850. When a vote would be held to determine the next capital, Austin won both that vote and another held in 1872. Construction on the state capitol, shown here in 1910, began in 1882. There's a Texas Ranger painting conflict with Native Americans. Launching the new republic. Question: what challenges did the leaders of the Republic of Texas face? The era of the Texas Republic began with the Declaration of Independence on March 2, 1836. It lasted until 1845, the year Texas joined the United States. After independence, Texans needed to form a government. In an election held in 1836, voters approved the Texas Constitution and agreed that Texas should try to join the United States. They denied the Texas Congress the power to amend or change the Constitution. Voters elected Sam Houston as president and Mirabeau Lamar as vice president. Houston appointed Henry Smith as Secretary of the Treasury. Stephen F. Austin became Secretary of State. Both men had run against Houston for president. The new nation faced a number of challenges. The new government had no money. Texas needed other countries to recognize its independence. It had to decide what to do with Mexican leader Santa Anna, who was still a prisoner. Native Americans and settlers were in conflict. One of the first tasks of the new government was to select a capital. The current site, Columbia, was too small and rugged for a seat of government. John and Augustus Allen had recently founded a settlement on Buffalo Bayou that they called Houston. The Allens wanted Houston to be the nation's leading port. They promised to build a handsome city if the government would move the capital there. In December 1836, Congress made Houston the capital for 3 years. Within a year, the town's population grew quickly. The president's house was a 2-room log cabin. The capitol was a simple 2-story building. The new government did not have enough money to pay its leaders or its army. It also owed $1.25 million in public debt from the Revolution. To raise money, Congress put in place a tariff. This is a tax on imported goods. It also taxed property and livestock. However, most Texans did not have enough money to pay these taxes. The government was also unable to borrow enough money. Houston did what he could to cut costs. He sent 3 of the 4 regiments of soldiers home. He tried to avoid conflict with Native Americans. He turned the defense of the Republic over to the Texas Rangers. The Texas Rangers were a force of scouts and messengers formed in 1835. They received almost no pay and had to provide their own horses, food, and guns. After the war, the Rangers' main duty was to protect settlers from attacks by Native Americans. Under President Houston's peace policies, their activities were limited. Despite Houston's cost-cutting, expenditures were always more than revenues. That is, the money that the government spent was greater than the money the government took in. By 1839, the public debt had grown by $2 million. To keep running, the government issued paper money for which the buyer would receive a payment of interest. Over time, these bills declined in value, however. Relations with Mexico and Native Americans. Why were relations between Texas and local Native Americans and Texas and Mexico challenging? Santa Anna was still captive in Texas. He ordered Mexican forces to return south of the Rio Grande. He also proposed a plan by which the United States could pay Mexico for Texas. In November 1836, Houston released Santa Anna. Santa Anna visited the United States and then returned to Mexico. Mexico President Anastasio Bustamante did not agree with Santa Anna's plans. Mexico still refused to recognize the independence of Texas. The Waco, Comanche, Kiowa, and other Native American groups resented the Texans living on their lands. The Comanche and Kiowa were especially hostile. They launched raids on farms and settlements in central Texas. In 1838, Houston sent Charles Sims to meet with Native Americans to try to end the raids and bring peace. Houston also had Texas Rangers patrol central Texas. The frequency of Native American raids decreased. While Sims successfully negotiated peace with some Native Americans, other Tejanos and Native Americans prepared for war. Many Tejanos had remained loyal to Mexico. They were not happy Texas was independent. The Cherokee were angry that after the Revolution, many Americans had settled on Cherokee lands. With Mexico's help, a Tejano named Vicente Cordova secretly raised an armed force. He convinced some Cherokee and other Native American groups in East Texas to join him. In August 1838, the rebels briefly fought against the Anglo-Americans. Cordova's group was defeated near Seguin in March 1839, and the revolt ended. Cherokee leaders said that they had not taken part in the rebellion, and Houston took no action against them. Seeking annexation and recognition. Guiding question. What were relations with the United States and other countries like in the early years of the Republic? In the 1836 elections, Texans had voted to join the United States. Most Texans were from the United States and wanted their new home to become part of the old one. They were fearful of attacks by Mexico and wanted U.S. protection. Joining the United States meant annexation or joining of the territory of one country to another. However, the Mexican government refused to recognize Texas' independence. In return, U.S. leaders did not want to upset Mexico by annexing Texas. In addition, U.S. anti-slavery groups were able to block annexation. They knew that adding Texas to the Union would give the slave states more votes in the U.S. Senate than the free states had. Meanwhile, U.S. President Andrew Jackson did not recognize Texas independence. He questioned the ability of the Republic to survive. Houston sent William H. Wharton and Meekin Hunt to Washington, D.C. to convince U.S. leaders that Texas should be recognized. In March 1837, the United States finally officially recognized the Republic of Texas. Houston next pushed for recognition of Texas by other nations. He sent J. Pinckney Henderson to Europe to negotiate recognition and trade treaties with nations there. Houston hoped that if Great Britain showed interest, the United States would quickly annex Texas. Henderson said the British could buy as much Texas cotton as they needed for their textile mills and offered to sell British goods in Texas. Britain agreed to a trade agreement in 1838. France also signed a temporary trade agreement. Both countries refused to recognize Texas, however. Like the United States, they feared it would not survive. They also did not want to offend Mexico.